Hi there, welcome back to my channel. Today's video features my version on clean and simple card designs. And the way I'm going to create these cards is by incorporating what I call a strip inlay technique. All of the cards today will feature stamps by Pretty Pink Posh. And the first stamp I'll be using is the Wild Rose, and I just happen to have coordinating dies for those. Otherwise, I'll be using my Scan and Cut. I'm also going to use Koala Friends, and for the third card, I'm going to use Sea Friends. I'm using a large Lawn Fawn rectangle stitch die, and I've die cut a piece of Nina 110-pound heavyweight cardstock. I've also colored in all my images off screen, and I've die cut them or used my Scan and Cut to die cut them. Next, I've arranged my focal point elements in the bottom left hand corner, kind of where they're gonna lay at the end, and I'm using a pencil to mark where I'm going to trim my panel. I'm using my trimmer to cut the part out that I'm going to inlay the strip of another piece of cardstock. I'm just going to quickly go through all of the cards and the way I'm trimming them, and then I will put them together. For my second card, I'm using the cute little koala bear images, and I'm actually going to cut this panel out diagonally. I'm kind of just lining up my image to see where I should cut, and then I will use my pencil and just mark on the panel where I'm going to cut. And then finally, for the third card, I'm going to trim my panel out horizontally. And again, I'm just using my T-ruler to make sure my line is straight. Make a couple of pencil mark lines, and then I will use my trimmer to cut that panel out. Okay, so the next step I did was to create the inlay strips, and I've got pieces of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and then for the first card I'm using Squeezed Lemonade, and I will also bring in a little bit of Wild Honey. I'm using my blender brush, or life-changing blender brush, to ink up that strip. And I'm just adding first Squeezed Lemonade, and I'm going over the entire panel. I haven't measured this panel out. I didn't cut it down or anything. I just kind of eyeballed the size of the opening, and then I will just start adding ink. Here I'm kind of trying to figure out where the edges of that panel are, and so when I bring in Wild Honey, I use the same blender brush, and then I'm just applying Wild Honey over towards the edges a little bit, just to darken up the edges. And I'll do that to both of the sides. And then I just go back and forth, building up layers of ink until I like the outcome and I don't have any harsh lines. Then I'll use my distress sprayer and add some water splatters, and then I can pick those up or blot those dry with a paper towel. For the second and the third card, I think this time it was the user error and not those awful video stealing trolls that sometimes steal video footage. I think I just forgot to hit the record button. But for the second card, the panel that I created for the Koala Friends, I used Fossilized Amber, Carved Pumpkin, and Vintage Photo. And then for the last card that I'll be using, Sea Friends, I combined Salty Ocean, Mermaid Lagoon, and blueprint sketch to create those inlay panels. I'll have all that information on the blog post that will coordinate with this video, and I'll have that listed down below. Okay, to start finishing up my card, I did cut the inlay strip down to the size of my card base. And then I adhered that directly down. Here I'm trying to line up the sentiment stamp that I'm using. And I'm going to use my Misty to help me stamp that out straight. The stamp set that I'm using is Be Friends, and the sentiment reads Thinking of You. And it fit just perfectly, almost like I planned it in that little strip. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp that sentiment down. And then I will use some clear embossing powder and heat set the clear embossing powder. Next, I'm taking some fun foam and I'm kind of tracing the panel out so that I know what size to cut that down. And then I'm just using my scissors to trim that fun foam down so that it goes across the entire panel. And I do that for both of the panels that are on either side of the strip inlay. And then I just use a little bit of liquid adhesive to place those down, just because it gives me a moment or two of wiggle room to align those straight. So to finish off this card, I took the images that I stamped and colored, and I'm just kind of aligning them across that panel, across that strip. And then I will use some foam squares along with liquid adhesive to pop up any of the parts that are across that strip. And secure the rest of it with some liquid adhesive. And I kind of wish I left that third flower in all the way in the bottom of the left corner, but somehow I tucked it to the top, and I think it would have looked just a little bit better at the bottom. Anyway, I had colored up a few leaves, and I'm kind of tucking those in between the flowers just to sort of separate the cluster. And that is the first card all finished. The second card is the panel that I cut diagonally, and there is that strip that I ink blended using Fossilized Amber, Carved Pumpkin, and Vintage Photo. I've sped this part of the video up quite a bit just to show you that it's the same basic concept as I did the first card, the same basic steps. It's just shaped or cut a little bit differently. And then again, the focal point will go across the two strips of the panel, and I'll pop up part of it, and part of it just adhered flat with liquid adhesive. And finally, on the third card, I did forget to stamp down my sentiment. And I remembered after I had the fun foam adhered, so I just used an acrylic block and hoped it would stamp down perfectly the first time. And it did, thank God. And then I'm using some clear embossing powder to set that in place. So there are all my cards all finished, and just for a little bit of embellishments, I'm using Studio Katya's Clear Mix number 1. And the only difference between mix number 1 and mix number 2 is the size of those dots. I just kind of grabbed a handful and I'm placing them here and there all around on my panels. And then I'm using multimedia matte and securing those down onto the card. So there are my 3 completed cards. These took no time to create, aside from the coloring. And I think to create those 3, all in all, it took me about 40 minutes, which is pretty good for me since typically I don't move that fast. I'm not typically a clean and simple card designer, but I really love the end result of these. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think of these. Let me know in the comments below which is your favorite. For me, it was kind of hard to pick just one, as all 3 have some component that is my favorite. I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.